Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Adobe Live Bootcamp. My name is Cyn Lagos. I am a graphic designer, photographer, and aspiring filmmaker. But most of all, I love mentoring aspiring artists like yourselves. I want to welcome you if you're joining us just today. This is day 2 of our bootcamp. Day 1 happened on Monday, so this is a continuous 3-day bootcamp exploring Illustrator and 3D and materials. And at the end, on our 3rd day, we're going to be assembling our artwork within Adobe Aero. So I'm super excited about continuing our project, celebrating Pride. So jump on the chat, let me know where you're joining from, and definitely check out my website, cynlagos.com/classes, if you would like to restream past streams that we've done here so far. Okay, so a quick announcement before we get started. Really cool announcement that I just learned today is I'm a former Adobe Creative resident, and for future Adobe residents, there is a new opportunity. The Adobe Residency is expanding their partnerships with MoMA, which is incredible. I am so excited for future creators that apply to this residency. So definitely check that out when you have a chance. Get your projects ready, get enthusiastic. I know it was nerve-wracking for me, but it can happen and it's life-changing. So let's get started now on Adobe Illustrator because we have a lot to do, a lot of really cool stuff to learn. So let's jump right into Adobe Illustrator. All right, so we're in Adobe Illustrator. Behind the scenes, I've already done the hardest part, which is to update my Illustrator app on Adobe Creative Cloud. And I say hardest, but it's not so easy. So click and go. The reason why I say that is because we just had a recent update with really cool features powered by Adobe Firefly. So we're going to explore some of those today, because today we're going to be exploring color and substance 3D and materials. So it's going to be part of our workflow. Let's pick up where we left off. I think this is going to be a really quick pickup for us to get acquainted with the workflow we started on Monday. So our final project is going to look something like this. And you can see here some of those elements that I've created here prior to our sessions for us to create here in this workflow. So we explore typography to arrive at this expression here on my headline. And we explored the different definitions, or maybe not definitions, different expressions of our pride journey. And I feel like for me, these are some of the ones that encompass my pride journey. And those are belonging, open to love, chosen family, inner child, mind's eye, leadership, of course, relentlessness, journey, being a star, because who doesn't want to be, the star of their own life, really? Community, transformation, and inclusivity. Okay, so we're going to continue to create some of these visual representations here, and I'm going to go pretty fast on this end because we have a lot of really cool stuff to cover. So let's get started here with star, because I think that one was a pretty easy one. So when it comes to star, there is a interesting, let me just open this up. Always do this. Always forget this part. All right. So when it comes to this, I want to say, let me put this over here. Okay. So when it comes to star, there is a shape already living in here that is basically it's a star, but it's kind of different here. So I like this traditional star, it's cool, but I'm going to create my own representation of a star. So I'm going to start with the ellipsis, and holding shift, like we learned on Monday, we can keep that transform still within our circle ratio. So I'm going to select this color here, our yellow hue, and I'm going to go into effects and go into distort and transform, pucker, and bloat. Okay, So with pucker and bloat, we explore this a little bit before. You'll notice that different things can happen. If you go in this direction, we get a flower of sorts. If we go in the opposite direction, we begin to get this really interesting expression of a star, to like one of those really really faint glares you get whenever you point your camera at a source of light, which I think is a little bit more true to the star I have in mind, right? So I'm going to do something like this, 71%. And just like that, we've created our own version of a star, which we will be exploring how to expand it into a 3D dimension. So far, all of our illustrations and our assets are 2D. So I'm excited for that part. All right, let's explore in the same fashion our leadership. I think in the leadership one, I wanted to use this color, this royal blue, because I think something that I really admire. We're gonna approach it in the same fashion, by the way, pucker and bloat. One of the things I really admire is whenever I see an LGBTQIA plus person in a leadership position, it gives me a sense of admiration, a sense of hope. My dog. A sense of hope, a sense of belonging in a way, because we all want to be able to know that we can aspire for those types of spaces in our community. So I want to create this symbol. I think it reminds me of royalty in some way, of those symbolic elements that they would have within their palaces. So I thought that would be a good fit here for leadership. All right, so for inner child, I'm going to approach it with, instead of a circle, so we talked about how everything begins with simple shapes. Instead of a circle, I'm going to begin with a square. So let's select that kind of pastel pink here, which I think is really pretty, right? Inner child makes sense, kind of a very light color for this expression. And we have here a square as opposed to a circle, and we're going to still go and apply distort and transform and see the different expression that happens because we begin with a different shape. So I'm going to go in this direction, and I'm going to get this version of a flower and this version of a star. So that's interesting if you want to begin to experiment of what results can I get with this effect if I begin with a different shape. And I can't wait to see what kind of expressions you have. Remember, this workflow is for you to find your own version of what these symbols could be for these expressions. Okay, so I like this one, and I'm going to just hit the letter E there to make it slightly smaller so it fits our canvas. Cool, we got those out pretty quickly, and I'm gonna go into community on this one. And I think, oh yeah, so community here, I wanted to start with a stroke. So something pretty interesting that I didn't know for a while there was the possibility that I can actually add a stroke to a shape, but not just any stroke. We can add a gradient stroke. So I'm going to do that. I'm actually going to pick up a color palette here that I have on my swatches. I can do that, or I can go to Windows, and much like before, we were working on typography, so we had a window workspace that is already presetted as typography. Instead, we can use, in this case, this feels a little bit more color focused. I might do something like painting in order to start to see all of these different panels here that involve color choices like swatches. So I have my rainbow swatch here. So that's cool to be able to always have those panels in mind, considering the workspace that the workflow that you're in the moment, right? So I'm going to add that rainbow to this, and you can see it's at the moment in the inside in the fill, right? We want it to be in the stroke. So I'm just going to swap that fill right here and remove that yellow from the inside. And just like that, I have a stroke on my rainbow, on my square that has a rainbow gradient on it. And of course, just like before, we can, round those edges, make it into different shapes. I feel like I really like the fact that this has like a sense of, it's a rectangle. We're reinterpreting these definitions these expressions with simple shapes. And I wanted to create something like maybe a square and maybe like a smaller one here to give the sense of multiple, but at the same time, community, because it's being enveloped, right? You want to be held in a space. That's what community feels like to me. So that's my expression of community there, which you will begin to see how being conscientious of shapes like this. Oh, I switched this to a stroke here. Being conscientious of things like this are really helpful in generating ideas that are a little bit more thoughtful to then create your final artwork. So you can see this artwork isn't just pretty for pretty sake. It's a little bit more considered. And I think that can result in different shapes or expressions that you might not have thought of before if you approach it in this fashion. So for inclusivity, I'm going to be making arches because we have these really cool arches enveloping my design. So I'm going to create these arches here. And ironically, because you think arches would begin with a square, they actually begin with a circle we'll begin with a circle. They actually begin with a square for me. So I create them like this. And I'm going to hit Shift X. I'm really quick with shortcuts. I'm actually a huge fan of shortcuts. If you've seen any of my streams, I'm often letting you know about shortcuts because it's in my graphic design careers always sped up my workflow tenfold, and I find that to be really valuable. So definitely consider that as you are in your learning path to find ways that you can really optimize the speed of your workflow. So I'm going to cut this bottom side here at the bottom, right? You see it there? I can do it a couple ways, but one of my favorite ways is to use the scissor and just click on that anchor point there. And you can see there what happened. It removed that point. And so that point now is free form, right? It's almost like it can go in whatever direction. And I can do the same thing there, hit that letter C to access it a little bit faster because we're a fan of shortcuts here. And we're going to remove it. Oh, I think I hit the letter C too far in. That's okay. We'll leave it like this for now. Okay, so you can start to see, okay, that was just the render, still rendering. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this one more time, and I'm going to go to right click, transform. No, actually I copied it, right? Command C, and I'm going to paste it directly on top. So instead of doing that, which just pastes it wherever in the canvas, I'm going to actually paste in place. So it's this one here, and you can see there how it works out, right? So now I can start creating a bit of dimension with these arches, which in consideration of our assembly in Adobe Aero, you want to create graphics that start to generate a bit of that 3D illusion, even if they're not actual 3D objects, right? So my final design is a combination of 3D objects, but also 2D objects that sort of resemble that aspect of 3D. So keep that in mind, because I think there's a bit of a pressure that you may think is necessary for you to create 3D objects or be like completely robust in this 3D world. But in reality, not really. There's definitely room for growth there. So for transformation is this guy right here. I love this representation of transformation. And before we get there, I'm actually going to show you a different expression. I thought of it today because I actually have a really cool logo here. I'll show it to you in a little bit. And maybe you can guess it. You can guess it as we're creating it. What I want you to take away from this is, one, that we can emulate a sense of 3D without actually having 3D objects. And also that there are really cool ways to recolor your artwork, which I'm super enthusiastic about, like showing you this, because I've been just experimenting with it so much since its launch yesterday. Okay, so if you know, if you've been keeping up with the live streams lately, they're really cool. All right, so let's go into, again, our basic shape here. Actually, we're going to begin with the gradient. So in our gradient tool here, yeah. Okay, so in our gradient tool, I want to be able to, you can see there, we have our gradient panel. In my gradient tool, I want to be able to select the gradient first and then create my shape. I find that to be a little bit more helpful. Sometimes I get a little caught up in the shape and then recreating the gradients. So I find that grabbing the gradient first is better. And in gradients, we have so many different types. We have linear, we have radial, and we have a more recent one is called freeform. So the gradient is in different places. Okay, so I'm going to create now a shape with that gradient in mind. Okay, let's select this one. All right, selected. And we're going to grab that circle. Oh, it's in my stroke. Okay. So remember which is in the front. So at the moment, stroke is in the front. So that's what happened there. So we're going to switch it and remove that stroke. Great. Now we got it. All right, so for this one, I'm actually going to change this gradient a bit. So let's bring this up and I'm going to start doing something. It'll still look like a rainbow, but I think what how I'm going to approach it is I'm going to create the blue first. So all I'm doing here is pulling those circles down and they're gone, just like that, right? So I can do it like this. So I can create a shape based on that. Oh, selected. Oh, stroke again. There it is. Remove that. Okay, so nice way to consider your troubleshooting is, do I have something selected and is something selected that I didn't do I have something selected and is that I didn't expect? And or is there something I should have selected prior to? That's usually a pretty easy troubleshooting approach. Okay, so I have this one here. So I have my circle. I'm going to make that a little bit smaller. Let's get there. Okay, I'm going to make one here. And I'm going to create one right about here, right on top. And then we're going to switch this one, this gradient. Let's switch this gradient to, actually, let's switch this gradient first. I think I'm going to do the yellow counterpart. So the warmer tones, we're going to do it on this one. And it goes on my stroke every single time. There you go. Back. And select that shape. Something like this. And then maybe do one more on this one. So essentially it'll be three of them. Yeah, 3 of them should be good. I'm just going to hit that letter E to quickly access my transform, hold Option and Alt to make sure it's still true to its ratio. And I think this shape here, I'm going to rotate it. So you can see this angle panel here. So you can rotate it just a little bit so that it can change its direction. So maybe something like that. And the same goes for this one. Let's change the direction. I think something like this is fine. Let's test it out. Oh, and Rachel's asking, how do I save the rainbow swatch? So I like saving it directly on the swatch here. So once there's this little plus sign, you have to have your gradient, your pre-made gradient selected in whatever graphic, and then you can hit that plus sign and you can name it whatever you want. Rainbow cool, maybe. And then you can see it propagated there. That's how you create it. That's a good question, Rachel. All right, so let's see. Let's continue here. I think maybe something like that, okay? because testing grounds, right? So let's select these and go into our tool panel and select the blend tool. So I'm going to select this blend tool with this one. And then these two, and then these two. All right, so that's what it's looking like now. If you can make some guesses of what this might be. We're getting close, so I think I can make a guess if we're playing trivia here. But now, before this, now you notice it just created one more circle in between. And so if you're familiar with the blend tool, this blend tool gives you the option of creating specified steps. And so in specified steps at the moment, I have one, the number one. What would happen if I had 200, right? Let's give that a go. Refresh that preview. And then we get that really cool blending of all of our 1, 2, 3, 4 shapes. And this can we guess what this is now? Okay, yes, the Adobe logo. So I had it here on one of my, if you can see it there. I love this. I was like, you know, it's using the rainbow. That's perfect. So now that we have it here, you can see that I didn't have a too strong of a color palette beforehand. One thing that I do think about, I know colors and color theory, such as science, sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I find personally, without using any tools, that relying on complementary colors always helps. Relying on opposite ends, like cool and warm colors in an image. I use this theory in photography too. In design, always helps. So it doesn't look terrible because I at least kept that in mind. Let me use some cool colors and let me use some warm colors on this opposite spectrum, and that helps. But whenever you are in kind of like this experimentation mode, I know that in the past, when I've created designs for clients, they maybe want to see different color interpretations. And I have often gone to this particular section here. We've gone to edit color, and I've gone to recolor artwork. But as of yesterday, we actually have a new tool for our tool belt, and it's Generative Recolor, and currently in its beta form. So let's click Generative Recolor here. Perfect. So you can see now we have this new panel, and often we have a little bit of help whenever we're approaching a new tool. So there is often presets or prompts, presets or samples. In this case, we have the sample prompts. So you can see here we have salmon sushi, we have sandy stone beach. Yeah. Dark blue, midnight, trippy disco. Really cool. So we can select our object here and try to create different variations of our color palette. So that's really cool in itself, because say, for example, you're pitching a logo or you are creating a pattern design and you want to speculate what it would look like for, Christmas launch, right? So you can start to consider that those color palettes and that color expression within prompts. So that makes it really interesting. So say, for example, I was to choose something like this. Hey, Adobe, are we revamping our logo? Because I think we are here in this. It happened here first in this stream. And you can see that this is based out of a sample prompt. So the words are part of this dialog box here, salmon sushi. Right away, something I want you to notice is that prompts in itself can be a bit intimidating. I found them intimidating when they were first introduced in Adobe Firefly, when they've been introduced and all of this AI generative change that is happening in our industry. I find it a little bit daunting, but one rule of thumb to consider is that you don't often have to add commands like add this color or remove this color. You don't have to add those commands. Is already part of the AI knowledge that this is what we're doing. So you can you can toss those to the side. What you do want to include is expressive nouns and adjectives. So maybe express your mood a little bit. I can add the word rainbow. I can say words like colorful. I can say things like warm, right? And then we can hit generate on there. And it's going to create different versions of that. This feels a little bit Jamaican, to be honest, but it is in its beta form. So you can start to see some of this particular color test that we're doing is on a gradient. So you can see the complexity that it's still nevertheless created for me that I find helpful and fast, because I no longer have to do this manually, right? I would have had to, in retrospect, I would have had to double click on this one, change this gradient right here, change this gradient, and then so on and so forth, right? And allow them to blend. I could also use recolor, which was just as helpful for me in the past, but I find that with this, you actually go a step further, right? So we have this selected. I'm going to go to, again, edit color, generative recolor beta. And when I select something, say I select this, I can still go further and go into those advanced options that I'm already familiarized with and select different hues. Say, for example, I want to select my brand color here. Let's say I want to create like a different hue, or I want to add a different color. I can do that. Here you go. I want this as a primary color. I can actually change that up and make it more focused. It could be a different expression of a brand client you have going on. If their brand focus color is green, but we want to assimilate to a particular holiday, say maybe not Christmas, because green is part of Christmas, but maybe Halloween or something like that, right? So we can start to unify colors that represent Halloween with that green color palette by expressing it here in either the prompts or going further and actually specifying that color. So I wanted to show you this because I think it's a wonderful new development that it fits perfectly into our design and in the way that we are going to be approaching our illustration workflow as we, get better and learn so many more tools. More text oriented. Cool. Yeah, I'm watching the messages on chat, by the way. So definitely continue to ask questions as you go. Somebody asked, what's the main difference between Illustrator and InDesign? Would you be able to create most of the same concepts in both programs? A lot of the ways that I use Illustrator are based on developing vector shapes that I can later bring into presentations like InDesign. InDesign for me is very presentation focused. It's an assembly tool for me, much like Adobe Aero will be for us. It's an assembly tool. We bring in these shapes into a layout design that looks like this, right? So those shapes are created in Illustrator, in our case, and we will assemble them in Adobe Aero. So in a similar fashion, I may create different assets that I will then assemble, maybe in Photoshop, Illustrator. You can definitely bring a lot of different elements and then assemble them into InDesign and create a zine and create a presentation. There are so many possibilities there. It's a multi-page program. So I love being able to create presentations in it, especially like if I want to create a presentation version of my portfolio. I made that on InDesign. I sometimes plan my socials on InDesign. That used to be really cool, but then I found Adobe Express, and that is really helpful too. All right, so we got that in our system, and I'm going to just place this here on the side. In a similar fashion, I'm going to show you how I created that really cool shape that is within my artwork. Okay. Oh, this happened. Okay, there. I'm going to hit save just in case. I think when I select Siri, it gives me this hand thing. This hand tool is not Illustrator's fault. So let's see, what else do we have here? Can I do without paying for a subscription? Can I do this without paying for a subscription? I believe you can experiment with generative color if you go to Adobe Firefly, the webpage. You're able to find a version that you can experiment with also there. This is a more robust. I think it's definitely part of your premium subscription. It's part of mine. So I think that's a good in if you want to try it out, on the Adobe Firefly. All right, that's gone. I requested Siri and Siri wouldn't go away. Okay, so let's see how we can create that really cool shape. I'm gonna create, we're hitting our 30-minute mark here. Sweet. This is usually how I work, folks. Super fast. Mine is the talking. the talking through it is definitely a new thing. Okay, so let's create two shapes. So what I'm doing here is, in similar fashion, I'm adding a gradient on the first circle, and I'm going to create a different gradient on the second circle. Maybe something yellow. And again, we can always use recolor to change it. Sometimes my color selections are so bad. I remember having to create actual swatches with gouache paint in art school, and sometimes it would just turn to mud. I don't know if y'all have had that experience, but you think you're doing it well, and then you add one color that did not belong, and it would turn into this mess. So sometimes on a digital expression that happens too. So you're not alone. There are definitely tools out there and resources. I use Kuler.com, Kuler, to get inspired for artworks. But nowadays, Adobe Firefly and all the experimentations everyone is creating are really, really inspiring. So definitely check those out as you're developing your skills. So I'm going to go again into that blend tool, hit 2, double click, and specified steps, and go to 200, right? All right, so 200. We have something similar to this. That's looking really good. And I'm going to go. Yeah, so Cody agrees that we can use Firefly for recolor. So definitely check that out. All right, so now something interesting that happens with the blending tool is that the blending tool usually is a practice of 2 elements. I know we tried it on several elements, so you can see it works on even 4, 3, however many you want. Oftentimes the rule I keep in mind is that I need to have 2 objects, definitely not 1, right? So in that case, when I'm blending, it's blending not only color, but also the shape size and the way it is expressed. In this case, we have 2 circles. Okay, so I'm gonna change the shape of this one here, and you can see something different happens. Now that's starting to play a little bit with that light illusion that I was telling you about earlier, that creates a sense of 3D, even though it's not 3D, which is really rather interesting if you think about it in terms of color theory, how something being darker in the foreground makes you feel like this is maybe coming at you. And let me know in the chat who's seeing it the other way around, because that's pretty peculiar and pretty cool. If you got that kind of brain, awesome. So you can see here that I changed the shape, so that changed with it. And we can move it around. It looks like it's stuck on the wall, right? And in a similar fashion, I can select the anchor point tool, and you can hit Shift C for that and select this anchor point here and start to move it around. So we can do something like this. And I'll do something similar here. Right? So it takes a little bit of experimenting to kind of get it to look forward in that way, because it is a light illusion. So I could go in here and change this color palette. All of this is still modifiable, which is super cool to me, because sometimes, you know, you're in a certain place. I know in Photoshop, I'm often going to the history panel and I'm like, no, like about 2 hours ago, I really like that expression better. So it is definitely important when things are non-destructible to me in my workflow. So I can choose a different color here and sort of like the strength of that color also in this gradient. So I can do something like this. I can change the rotation of that color too. And I feel like it's usually really helpful to have a darker color in the foreground. And when I do, it starts to look a little bit more like it's coming at you in some ways. So I'm going to do that again and see if I can get there. Sort of like this. And it's just there's so many opportunities here to start to create something rather futuristic, I would say, in these examples. I love that. And so this is my graphic representation of the expression transformation, which I think is a vital part of the LGBTQIA+ community. I think we believe in transformation. I think we allow ourselves to transform and grow. And I think I advocate for anybody who is in that facet of their lives because it's beautiful, right? Like we can argue we are transforming because we're educating ourselves and learning so much more every day. So now that we've done that, I think we are quite ready. One last shape I think we're going to modify, and then we're going to jump into our 3D and materials. So get ready with your questions. Let me know if this is brand new to you, if you've always kind of wondered what it was like, but you know, it's not there yet. That's totally fair. So I'm going to create this circle so that, this heart, so that it feels like it's separated and it's imitating a bit of an illusion there too. So much like before, I'm going to select that scissor and I'm going to select this anchor right here and cut it. Just going to cut it. And now when I do this, there are two different shapes, right? That was simple. Now I'm going to select a circle and create a bit of a flat, almost like it's an oval, but the flatter it is, the more it's really going to exemplify this illusion. I'm going to add a swatch, that rainbow swatch we had going on our swatches that Rachel wanted to learn how to create. Didn't forget. And we're going to bring it up to the top and sort of align each point a little bit so that it looks, we're not going to be too precious here. You know, y'all know the deal. We have a time crunch, but there's definitely room for you to like get in closer and then take a look how just by doing that, it makes it look like it has a hollow area within it. And I think that's an interesting part of illustration that I really enjoy. So I'm gonna make this a little bit rounder just so that it looks a little bit more complete. Bring that closer. I think it would be kind of around there. All right. And that's how we created this circle, this heart here. Interesting, right? All right. So let's jump now that we've created our heart. We have all of our really cool shapes. By the way, Journey is an example of the curvature pen tool, which I find really cool. I mean, I have been doing design for over 10 years. I did not have the curvature tool, and I remember the day I was introduced to the pen tool, and it was definitely time consuming in so many ways. The stroke is up here, and something I like about the stroke is that you can also make it a round cap, so it looks a little bit more finished. I think any designer would feel like, yeah, I want it complete, right? So perfect. We have that. So let's get started. Let's hit save here. I think if Annika's in the room, she would be like, hit save, Cyn. You know, because we always forget to hit save. Disastrous. Okay, so Rachel says, how do I create stronger edges, curves on these shapes? Stronger edges. I guess the word stronger is a bit subjective. Can you like specify a little bit more. Definitely those presets of being able to have those right here on your stroke, to have those caps and those corners, is a way that I like to make it a little bit more complete. Same with our relentless triangle here. This relentless triangle began as a complete triangle like this, and I find that just curving that feels a little bit more organic and less digital. I think often we're attempting to bring the digital into like a space that we were more familiar with, which is real and physical and analog. So I think that's kind of why that it tends to look really good, in my opinion. All right. So let's go here and change our workspace one more time. And before we have a little bit of an introduction here, we're going to delve into this so much more on our third day. So this is going to be an intro to our 3D workflow. Exciting. So let's go into workspace, and I'm going to actually go into, where am I here? I want to bring up 3D materials. When I say 3D, I think of the letter T because I spell it out instead of seeing the number 3D and materials. So that happens to me. I don't know if it happens to other people. Okay, so let's see. Here we have inclusivity. Awesome. So we have all of our shapes. I'm happy. We were very intentional with these. And now we have our 3D and materials panel. Really, really cool stuff happen here. So right away, you're going to see that we have different ways of creating 3D elements. We have a plane, we have extrude, revolve, and inflate. Very, very popular one is inflate. My second favorite is definitely revolve, because it can definitely create some really gnarly results with a shape that you would never think would do that. So we're going to explore that just now. Also extrude, it just pushes that distance. So let me just show you here what that kind of looks like. So for example, if I use extrude on this, that happened really fast, right? So if I use extrude on our journey, we would get that exact drawing, but just pushed out in that kind of Z axis. And of course, we can decide which angle, which viewpoint we're looking at it. So in rotation, it lives in rotation, but I think of it as a camera angle. So for example, if I wanted to create isometric top, you can see it from above, right? So that camera angle from above, which gives it a bit more dimension in that sense. Of course, we can expand that depth, which is really, really cool. How now this very seemingly simple line just turned into really, really cool 3D object, right? So the final step is always to render, to do this button right here, but I don't want to step into ray tracing at the beginning of my workflow because it will slow down my system, and it will slow down anyone's system. I mean, I have a pretty beefy system, and it's just the way it works, right? So you want to be ready with your design before you do that. So we're going to continue to explore here as we go through our shapes. So let's go into our shape here, the star, and let's inflate it, shall we? All right. So when I inflate it, you can see that there's these like same illusions of light happening. But when I put it to isometric, let's say top for now, just to see, you can see the depth isn't that far off. So we can increase that depth, but we can also, instead of increasing the depth, we can choose to inflate it on both sides. It's a little bit of a caveat that I ran into, that I noticed that when I did my Adobe Aero Augmented assembly, I found that when you rotate that phone to see the visibility of behind the object, that object was flat, like it was cut with a knife, you know? And if you inflate both sides, it really creates that illusion a little bit better than if it's just without it. You can see how flat it looks, right? So kind of your prerogative there, whichever one fits your fancy a little bit better. And let me see, I'm gonna probably do front for this one. But even though I'm doing front, when I export these objects, I want to know that that back is also going to be inflated. So we did our part there. We can go into Relentless. And this is an example of, I'm going to do inflate for this one, which is similar to what we did in the previous one. But I just want to show you what happens when we revolve a particular shape. It turns into this wild new thing. It's like you almost didn't know that that was the foundation. So let's hit revolve here for sake of fun. So look at that. I think that's really cool. So I made that based on my triangle shape, my upside down triangle shape, which is a beautiful symbol of relentlessness actually in queer history, right? So I love that this turns into this whole new thing. This I would use it as a base whenever I want to place objects. I think about how, okay, maybe they're floating, but what if they are not exactly floating? They have a base below it. So that gives it some room. And you can see here that I can toggle the viewpoint directly on this, how would we call it? This sort of bullseye shape here. You can go to the left, to the right, up and down, and you can see how that looks as a representation. Of course, we can continue to influence that shape here. And if, like, for example, I want to change this shape and revolve the angle a little bit less, I can do that, right? I can also twist it and turn it into a brand new thing, which, wow. I mean, that's amazing. There's so much room for experimentation. I have so much fun getting lost in these process. I'm going to go to inflate for my, I know this is not as fun, but it's part of my design. So like, I'm going to go with the inflate for now. I love how many things can happen just exploring the 3D and material presets, the plane, extrude, revolve, and inflate. I'm going to do this as a front and also inflate both sides. Okay, one different thing I want to do to some of these, which I will also inflate. You let me know on the chat if you want to experiment with something else. We can try it out. So I'm going to hit inflate here. Is there any possibility of using what we create with augmented reality? Using what we create, I don't think I understand that question, but if you mean how it can be experienced with augmented reality at the moment, you can scan a QR code and that's going to allow you to enter that that project. So we'll learn a little bit more about that on day 3 tomorrow. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm not entirely sure there. Okay, I'm going to hit inflate again. And this time we're going to explore the other 2 tabs. So I have materials and I have lighting. Let's explore lighting with this one. One new thing that happened, if you haven't touched 3D and materials ever, all of this is new to you. But if this is pretty, this is something you got familiarized with, a new feature in lighting that you might want to go visit is that now we can actually add lighting sources. So we have light 1, which is right there. It's kind of cool, right? It's a source light of white, pure exact white, right? FFFFF. And we can add a second one. We can add a second one there. You can see how it reflects. And that second light is right above the other one, but we can move it around. I think that's really awesome because it starts to change the way that shape is extruded, or it looks 3D, right, to the eye. We can also change the color of that. So I can influence that to a warmer tint. Maybe I can do something, I don't know, light blue just to make it still fit. And that's me being subtle, right? If you want it to be pretty intense, you can definitely go in that direction, right? And it, of course, is going to blend with the colors that you have going on. You can change the rotation manually here. And I think that is helpful sometimes to use the levels, or you can use the little dot right there in the graphic. And I think that is a really cool way to change the way the 3D element is expressed. In here, another cool thing that I really enjoy is shadows. So I like to turn that on, and that creates again, that illusion even further, right? Because now we have a shadow. So there's a light source, there's got to be a shadow, right? So I have this on behind the object. You can also explore below the object, and you can also create a boundary around that shadow. I'm not entirely sure what you use that boundary for just yet. I have yet to experiment with that, but I know the distance is important to me to kind of see what that will look like. And so we'll leave this one in that way as we continue on. By the way, I wanted to change the star to a gold because I already have a yellow representation, which was the child, right? So I'm gonna create, go into the materials section, and we have here all of these different materials. I'm gonna make sure you can see it here. So we have here all of these really cool materials that you can play with. So these materials essentially are patterns, and they wrap around and blend with the lighting conditions that is applied to this as well. So you can see how interesting that looks, because now it has texture. Again, in the pursuit of trying to bring the digital into the physical, we want to emulate lighting conditions that we experience with our bare eyes, but also textures, right? So I like particularly this one, gold neutral, for my star, because of course my star is gold, right? We also have gold leaf here on this one. And again, all of these have not been ray traced yet. So even though these are 3D, the actual 3D is gonna look slightly more defined once we ray trace it, which we could do at least to one today. So as we go on here, I might want to do the same thing to, like, for example, a more complex set of graphics. Like this one has 1, 2, 3, 4 shapes within it. So that might feel a little bit complicated. You might think, oh, do I have to do each of them individually? No, we can just group them and go to object and create inflate. And that will do this version of my design. Okay. And now for me, I found that in experimenting, I liked, I'm going to ungroup it. I just wanted you to know that you can do that. You can do several objects, but I'm going to ungroup it. And yeah, and I'm just going to inflate the eye. I think that looks really cool when I do that. And if I do them separately and add a material, like maybe something like this on this one, I think it starts to look really awesome and kind of different in its own way, right? There's room for experimentation there, but you can start to see that a combination of the 3D and also 2D objects can be a cool way to break the rules. So that's something to think about. Same with this. I'm going to create this into 3D, and let's inflate it just like that. Look how cute it looks with that little bit of lighting. So in our time, let's ray trace it. Let's ray trace this one. Now, once we ray trace it, every single time we make a change, it's going to be ray tracing over and over and over, which could be a bit gnarly. Essentially, it also does that to the 3D object every time we make a change, which coincides with the segue. You can make changes whenever you want, even after you've developed your design into a 3D format. I can still go in here and, I don't know, probably change the color. I added a stroke on this one, I guess that's what I did there. And you can still do that. So non-destructive is the name of the game. We love being able to do that. We're gonna do the same thing here. And look at our little circles, seemingly simple, but now they're so cool. And I'm gonna create inflate both sides. And we're gonna finalize it with doing it to text. I think that is pretty awesome. So I'm just gonna expand this here a couple times. Oh no, just need to do it one time. All right, so that is our courage word. So we're gonna be able to do it on this text, malleable text that we created on Monday. So let's go to object. Let's go to object and hit inflate, extrude. Oh, extrude looks really cool, doesn't it? Okay, but it starts to look a little bit harder to read because it's black. So I might and they're really tied together. So I might want to use this fine leather and change my lighting a little bit so that it can start to be a little bit more noticeable. There is standard lighting, top left, but I think inflate is probably best for this one. Yeah, there you go. That's much better. But of course, I can actually pull some of these shapes apart, right? Ideally, you do it a little bit earlier, but you can start to see how that looks. And when I exit, it adds that change with it, which is so awesome. So, all right, we created a lot of different assets today. We not only designed them, but we also created them into this 3D expression. I hope y'all had fun and learned a lot of different tools today. I find this to be a really special way to approach design, and I'm excited to explore this in Adobe Aero tomorrow. And after this, I'm actually going to be hosting a fellow photographer, and I would love to see you there and join me on the chat. Thank you for being here.